Hey, what's going on guys, and welcome back to this new video. Previously, I guided you step by step to the implementation of a full web application. And during that video, we learned together how to start from a business requirement to the design of the class diagram, to the design of the backend application, the implementation of the different features, how to share a book, how to create a book, how to upload the file, how to secure the application with JWT token, and also how to validate the user account using email validation. We also saw together how to upload a file, how to upload a picture and save it on the server directly without the need to save it to the database. We went also through the implementation of the front-end application using Angular, and we saw how to decompose or how to create the different components of the application, how to create reusable components, how to create a rating component with the stars, and so on and so forth. And honestly, what I really enjoyed where the video was streaming are your feedbacks and comments. So first of all, I was really surprised that the community that I was trying to build is really worldwide. So like I saw people commenting from really almost from all over the world, which is something super motivating and super nice for me to know. So now we are done with the implementation of the basic features of our application, but our application is still running on our local machines and it really depends on our IDE. So in order to run the backend, we need to run from our IDEs as well as for the front end. But what if we want to run our application without the use of the IDE? So the answer for this question, we need to containerize or to Dockerize our application or the different parts of our application. Means we need to have Docker image for the backend, another Docker image for the front end, and of course for the database and all the other dependencies, we already have some built-in or provided applications or containers. So for that, the first part of this video will be to showcase and to guide you again step by step how to containerize an application, a backend as well as a front end. I saw this question, or like you have been asking me and sending me emails and comments, how to containerize a front end or a full stack web application based, for example, on a Spring Boot backend and an Angular front end. So the answer is coming today. So just follow along and you will learn how to containerize a full application and to make it running independently or outside of our IDE. But we are not yet done. We will come to the best part, is to bring our application to life. This means I will guide you step by step, and I will showcase and teach you how to deploy an application to a VPS. So like we will deploy the application to another virtual private server. All right. And this step or this process will not be absolutely manual. So like we need to make it 100% automatic. This means each time we push a change to the backend or to the front end, we need to build or to redeploy the full change or like the whole change that we made to that part. And to showcase that, I will show you how to build a full CI/CD pipeline using GitHub Actions. So I will show you what are the different jobs, different steps, what are the necessary configurations we need to do in order to deploy or to build the full application and finally deploy it to our server. And absolutely the application will be available via the internet. So this is what we will learn together today. So before we go and dive into the code, I have two announcements for you. The first one is about the next and the coming video, which I think everyone is waiting for it. So the next video, I will show you how to integrate Keycloak within our application. So like I will show you how to migrate from an existing application like the book social network that we built together, how to migrate it from JWT to Keycloak. And by the way, I want to mention something which is super important. Securing an application with JWT token sounds good and is good. And also I think everyone needs to learn it and everyone wants to learn it. So I provided so many videos about it. Even I provided videos how to upgrade and how to remove the deprecations, and all the videos are grouped in playlists in my YouTube channel. So please go ahead and check them. But as I mentioned before, JWT or securing a backend application with a custom implementation of JWT is not really recommended. I know this sounds shocking for you, and like many people are learning how to implement JWT, and also like many of you contacted me and they told me that they secured their application using JWT and it's already on production. But believe me, it's not the best way. So the best way to do that, or the best way to secure your application, is to use an auth provider. And among the auth providers that we have, personally, I really like and enjoy working with Keycloak. So Keycloak is an open source authentication provider which is really robust and can secure our application in a really good way. And also we can configure it in different ways. Also depends on our needs. So stay tuned for the next video where I will show you and I will guide you again step by step how to migrate from JWT security to Keycloak security for both front-end and back-end. I will also show you how to configure Keycloak and what are the necessary configurations and all the different configurations that you need to do in order to make Keycloak up and running for you for the backend and for the front-end. So stay tuned for that, and the video will be released very, very soon. So that was the first announcement. The second one is the following. Lately, I remarked that so many of you are asking me in the comments, or like they have some questions or have some few things they need to implement or they want to implement, they are facing some issues. And to be honest, like creating videos for each comment, first, it's really time consuming, and second, sometimes it might be really specific and the answer is really short. So I decided to go ahead and start publishing videos on my Instagram. To be honest, usually I'm not so active on Instagram, but I said, okay, maybe this is the platform where I can share some knowledge, or I can share few information with you in like in short form, like in reels or shorts. So if you like the idea, all you need to do is to subscribe or to follow me. Honestly, I don't know how this is called. So I will leave you the link of my Instagram account in the description of this video, and all you need to do is to follow me there. So what I will be doing, just to explain to you the process, what I will be doing is I will try to follow your comments on my YouTube channel on my different videos, and every time I will pick a comment and I will try to answer it in a short video on Instagram. All right, so if you like the idea, just drop a comment or like send me a message. And also, like, the most important part is just to follow me there, so I know how many people or like how many of you are interested in this idea. So this will help me decide to go for it or not. Great. So now we are done with the two announcements. The next part is, like, before we dive really into the code, is about the source code. So the source code, as I mentioned, the video is composed of two parts. The first one is containerizing the application, and the second one is to build a CI/CD pipeline. So for that, I created two different branches. The first one will contain only the containerization, and the second one will contain also the containerization and the CI/CD pipeline that we will build together. So whether you can, if you only need or if you only want to see the containerization part, just go ahead and check the code there. If you need the full CI/CD pipeline with the containerization as well, you can also check that. I will leave you the links of the two different branches in the description of this video. Otherwise, all you need to do, just go to the repo. Don't forget to leave a star there and to fork the project, so you get all the updates and all the pushes that I will be doing in the future, and check the different branches there. So now I think we are done with this introduction. Now it's time to dive deep into the code and start containerizing and deploying our application. So now, with no further ado, let's get started. Our application is implemented fully in the backend as well as in the front end. So the application runs correctly when we run it from our IDE. But we have this dependency, which is we need to run the application from our IDE. Like, we need to start the backend as well as we need to start the front end in order to have our application up and running, and we can use it locally. So now in this phase, as mentioned before, we will move on to Dockerizing and containerizing our application. So what I need to do first, or like the first step I will do, I will prepare the infrastructure or like the folder structure for my Dockerization. First, I will create a new folder here, and I will call it Docker. After that, I will create two subfolders, one for the backend and one for the frontend. So you can use a different structure, but this is the way, or like the best way I found that suits my need. So here I will create a backend, and then in the same level I will create frontend. So now in each folder I will create a file, and I will call it Docker file, like without any extension and with a capital D. So now I will copy this empty file to the frontend folder. So now we have our Docker with the backend and the frontend. So now everything is ready. First, we will start by Dockerizing or creating the Docker file for our backend, and we will build an image and we will see how we can use it, also what we need to update step by step. Before diving too much into the code and implementing our Docker file for the backend, first let me explain to you and let's imagine together what we need to build for this Docker file and how to replicate the steps. So now let's put Docker file and Docker in away, and let's imagine this. So here for example, if we want to run the application locally outside of our IDE, so I want to close my IDE and just run the application. So what I need to do, first I need to build my jar file. I need to build my application. So this means I want to run, for example, the command maven clean package, and I want also to run the test to make sure that everything is running fine, and so on and so forth. But when we come to the build step, or like to run the application, we need to make sure that tests and everything is working fine. Also, the application needs to be or needs to compile correctly, and so on and so forth. So the first thing we need to do is, as I mentioned, is to package or to build our application. Then what we want to do, we will copy the jar file and put it in some place, all right, in our application. Sorry, not in our application, but in our folder in our laptop or in our working machine. And then we open the terminal and we run the command java -jar, and then if we have arguments that we need to pass, for example, if we want to pass an active profile, or if we want to switch to a different database URL, and so on and so forth, and then we need to specify the jar file that we want to execute. So these are the manual steps that we need to do in order to build and run our application. But in this case, before moving to Docker, what we need to do, imagine that we just cloned the source code and we want to run it on a new machine. So before that, what we need to do, we need to prepare the infrastructure or the required tools to run this application. First, we need to install Maven, and then we need to install JDK or one of the Java versions, for example 17 or 18, and so on and so forth. And then we need to do the whole process that I just explained a few moments ago. And this is what we will be doing right now. All right, so now I just want to mention something. Here we are talking about our backend application. So for the backend application, here there is something which is super important. So this one, it was before the 001 snapshot, which is the default version when we create a new project. Now we are talking about releasing our application and packaging our application. So we need to update the version. Why we need to update the version? Because we want to know for each version what was the changes, or what were the changes that we introduced, and the new features, and so on and so forth. So for the versioning, if you want to know more about versioning and how to version an application, please drop me a comment or send me a message, and I will create a dedicated video for that. So here we talk about features, measure versions, features, and bug fixing. All right, so like it depends from one project or from one company to another, even from one team to another, the way how they do versioning. All right, so now you got the first point. We just gave a version or a first version to our application. Now we can go back to our Docker file and start creating our image. All right, so the first thing is our build step. So here I will just add a comment to make it clear for you. So this is the build stage. You know, with Docker, by the way, if you're new to Docker, if this is the first time, or like you are not so familiar with Docker, please go ahead and check the video that I released before about Docker. All right, so now first thing, we need our base image. All right, so we said that imagine that we clone the code on a new machine, and the first thing we need to do is to install all the required tools. So for example, Maven, in order to build our application. So here first I will use Maven as a base image, and I hope like at the time of recording this video, the latest version is 3.8.7, and we can use, for example, the OpenJDK 18. And this build, or like this stage, I will give it a tag, so I will call it build. All right, then what we need to do when we clone our project, we need to define the working directory. So like we clone the code to some place, or like to some destination, and for that we need to define our work directory. And here let's call it build, since we want to build our application. And then what we need to do is to copy this pom.xml. So now this is a little bit more Docker specific. So when we clone a project, now let's go back to the normal machine or to our local machine. When we clone the project, we need to navigate to this location, and then we need to run a command to install the dependencies, which will read, or like Maven will point to this pom.xml file, and it will run or start running or downloading the dependencies, configuring the project, building it, and so forth. So this is what we will do just right now. So here, since we are inside a Docker container, we need to copy our pom.xml file to the current location. So the current location will be this build folder, all right, since we defined it before. Now, all we need to do is to run a command. So the first thing, we need to install the dependencies. So here I will use Maven dependency, and then I will add the argument go offline. So this go offline will allow me to download all the dependencies even in an offline way. So then after downloading all the dependencies, I want to copy the source folder, my src folder, so which is this one. All right, so this is the most important file for me because all the code exists in this src folder. So we want to copy this one to the current location. So like dot is the build folder, and then I want to copy it also to another folder called src. Now what I can do, I can run, or like I can package my application. So I will run the command maven clean and then package. And for packaging the application, I don't need to run the tests, since as I mentioned, when it comes to building the application, we assume or we know that the application or like the tests are running successfully and so on and so forth. And the application of course compiles and all this stuff, all these dependencies that we need to make sure that we have before building our or packaging our application. So that's why I will add the argument skip tests. All right, so this will just build the application without running the tests to make the build a little bit faster. All right, so now let's move on to the runtime stage. So the runtime stage is now we want to start, or like we want to start building and copying the application and run our application. So to run the application or to run any Java application, we need, of course, our JDK. So here, this is why I will add from, and then I will use Amazon Corretto and the distribution 17, since our project is defined on Java 17, I guess. Yes, it's Java 17. So if you are using a recent version, please go ahead and use the correct one. All right, so then I will go back here and I will define few things, and I will explain them later on. All right, so now this is the first stage. Imagine, or like consider this, that you are working on the first folder or the first destination. Now we want to move to another destination. So I need to define my work directory or work dir, and let me call it app. So since this is our application. Now I want to copy the build package or the build jar file. So here, when we run the command clean package, we will have a folder called target, and inside this target we will have a bunch of generated folders, classes, and so on and so forth. And among that, we see here that we have our application, which is book network 001 snapshot. So let me show you how this is going to be. So let me go back here and then book network. So here, for example, let me run this. I will just run the command. I will use my MVN wrapper or my Maven wrapper, since it's not installed on my local machine. So the wrapper I'm talking about this one. And this .mvnw is this file right here. All right. So, and then I will do clean package -d skip test. Like the same command, and this will start packaging my application. So as you can see here, it starts compiling and doing all this stuff except running the tests. And here you see we have build success, and the total time was this time. All right, so now if I go back and check the target again, we see that we have our book network with the version 100.jar, and the 100 is the one from this version here. So like Maven is able to automatically pick the version and concatenate it with the artifact name. all right, or the artifact ID, sorry, not the name. So like the final jar file will be the artifact ID and then version 100, or like the version we specify. All right, so now you get the thing. Now what we need to do after defining our work directory, we know that when we run this Maven clean package, we will have a folder called target, and inside this folder we have our jar file. All right, so what we need to do is simply as now let's go back again and imagine that you are working directly on our laptop or on our machine. So what we want to do is to copy this file, this jar file, and put it in some place. All right, so this is what we will be doing. So I will do copy, and then here, like the power of Docker, we can do from build. So like we want to copy from which stage. So this build is referencing to this stage right here, all this stage. And then what I want to copy from the build folder, since this is my work directory. And then I have a folder called target, which is this one. So it's the target. And then inside the target, we know that we have a file called book network and then something. All right, so that's why I will replace the version with a star. So star means that anything that comes after book network, and then .jar. All right, where I want to copy it, I want to copy it into my working directory, and then /app/. All right, so now we copied the jar file. What we need to do now, we go back to Docker specific things. We know our application by default, it runs. So let me open it in here. So here we know our application, it uses the port 8088. So now all I need to do is to expose that port. So expose 8088. All right. And finally, now, so as I mentioned, this is Docker specific, since we are building an image and we want to run a container out of that image. So we need to expose the port by default. All right. After that, what we want to do here, normally, if we go back to our machine, all I need to do is to run this command, for example. So here, let me go to target, and here I'm inside the target folder. And I have my jar file already in this target folder. And the command to run this jar file is java -jar and then my book network.jar. And if I have arguments that I need to pass in here, all I need to do is, for example, let's say that I want to set the active profile, and it will be the spring.profiles.active. Sorry for the typo. .profiles.active equals something. For example, let's say it's dev or prod or local or something like that. And you know, the active profile is defined in this way. So this is what I did: spring profiles and then active. So I just mentioned that I want to pass an argument called spring profile active, and then all I need to do is to specify which is the active profile that I want to use. All right. So for that, now all I need to do is to run my command. So the command, it's java -jar, and now I will leave the arguments and I will come back to it in a few moments. And then all I need to do is my book social network, or like my book network application. And now I know that the version is 100.jar. All right. So this is how I can run my application. But now, when it comes to Docker, we know that the database, first, like we know that the database URL might change. And also I want to set the active profile. All right. Also, the version might change from one file to, the version might change every time I build a new feature, or I release, or I fix something, or I do anything within my application. So for that, what I will do, so we will go back to define few things here. What I will do is I will ask for arguments. So when I build my application, I can ask, or like I can pass some arguments. So for example, I can say, or like I can ask for the active profile, also for the application version. I can also ask for the database URL, and so on and so forth. So now this part, or like what I will add in here, which is the argument, is Docker specific. So we need to pass this argument when we build the image. All right. So I will say here profile, or like I will call it profile, and I can also give it a default value. So let's say by default, if we don't pass the argument, the active profile, or like the profile value, will be dev. All right. Also, I will ask, or like I need another version, or like another argument, and I will call it app version. And for now, I will give it 1.0.0, which I assume this is the default one. And we need, of course, as I mentioned, when we build the application, we need to pass that version. Otherwise, if we don't pass it, it will automatically use dev as profile and 100 as the application version. All right. So here we come also to another important thing. So when we have these arguments, we cannot use them directly here. So for example, I cannot say, or like I cannot use it in this way. So for example, I cannot say app version. So like it doesn't generate a compile error, or like even when we build the application, but it will not, or Docker will not be able to read this one. And the workaround, or how to fix that, is to create an environment variable. All right. And I will call it jar version for this one, equals, and then $, and we can now specify, or like assign it the app version. All right. And here, instead of using the app version, I will just use the jar version. All right. So Docker will be able to read this one. So also plus, or like the other information that we need to pass, as we did here for the jar file, I will also pass the active profile. So here I will say also environment, and then I will call it active underscore profile, and I will give it the value as we did before, our profile. All right. So here let's pass this first argument. As we said, the spring.profiles.active. Let me fix this typo, and then equals $, and brackets, and here we need to pass our active profile as a parameter. Great. This is good progress. Now we also know that our application is running not the application, but the database for our application is running also as a Docker container, or we can even install it. Like for example, we can have it on a dev environment running on a Docker or as a Docker container, but in the production it's installed on premises, or like we have it installed there. So we need also to have a dynamic value, which is, for example, let's call it in this case database URL. All right. So I will create another environment variable, and I will call it db URL. And for this db URL, I will give it default value from here. So I will go back here, and all I need to do is to copy this one. All right. And I will paste it in here. But one thing, I need to change this local host. I need to give it the container name. The container name is the one that we specified in our Docker Compose, which is the PostgreSQL BSN or Book Social Network. All right. So because, you know, like containers, they communicate using the container name. All right. That's why it's a good practice, and it's super important when you create your Docker Compose. It's very important to give the container, or like to assign the container a name. All right. Okay, so now we are almost done with this. We can also pass, for example, other environment variables if needed. But here, before moving forward, let's specify, or let's also pass the database URL as an input or as an argument. So it will be the spring.datasource.url equals my db URL. All right, and now we are ready to package, or like to build an image for our application. Now let's go ahead, open the terminal, and let's see how we can build an image. All right, now let's open the terminal. Let's clean this one. And now in order to build our image out of this Docker file, so one important step, we need to be inside the book network folder, which is our backend. All right. So like you need to run the command inside this book network. Why? Because here you know that we want to copy pom.xml, we want to copy the source folder, and so on and so forth. So we need to run it in this place. Okay, and now the command to build our image is simply docker build, and then we need to assign it a tag, and we need to pass arguments if we want to, but here it's not a must to pass the arguments because we have the default values and we can use them by default. And then we will have a container with this or an image with this with the tag that we will provide. All right, so now let's go ahead and build our image. So the command is docker build and then -t to say tag. And the tag, let's call it like for our for local machine, like for locally, let's call it BSN or Book Social Network, and also let's call it BSN. And then we can give it a version. So for example, let's say 100, which is the same version as the jar file. And now what we need to do is to specify which Docker file we need to use in order to build our application. So the Docker file, we pass it as -f. So for example, if the Docker file was inside the book network, we can say dot. So dot is the context or like the location of the Docker file. But if since the location of our Docker file is different, so the file will be -f and then it's docker and then backend and /docker file. All right. So now all we need to do is to hit enter and see what will happen. All right. So here we need to go one step out because we are inside the book network, and now we can run again this command. All right, so here we have an issue, docker build. Okay. Yep, so here we are missing the dot. So like the context is the current context, which is the book network. Now, if we run the command, you see here that it starts building the Docker. So first, like it's building the definition, and it will be building the image or the Docker image layer by layer. And now, as you can see, it's like downloading the dependencies. So this is the step that we are running. Run mvn dependency, go offline. So it's downloading all the dependencies. Once it's done with this one, it will move to the next one, which is like now it's defining the work directory. So it's creating the work directory in this phase, and then it will start copying, and then of course like it will expose, but it will not run this command. This command will be executed when we run the container itself, and we will do it once this is done. I will try to fast forward, and then we can move on once it's done. All right, so now we have our image. So the image is available, and if we open, for example, Docker dashboard, if you have the UI installed, you can check the Docker dashboard and the images, and you will see our new image getting built. All right, so now you see in here when we open our Docker desktop or the Docker dashboard and we navigate to images, here we see that we have our BSN/BSN and with the tag 100, the one that we just built right now, and it was created 39 seconds ago. All right, so this is ready. Now let me show you when we run this application, or when we run a container out of this image, we will see what will happen. So in order to do that, all we need to do is to go to our Docker Compose, and here we need to include or like to add a new service. All right, so the new service, let's go ahead and let's call it, for example, our BSN API. So I will call it BSN API. BSN again is for Book Social Network, and if you didn't watch the previous video, just please go ahead and check it. I will give it a container name, and I will call it again BSN API, and the image will be my BSN/BSN. All right, so this is the local image. I just gave it this name BSN because afterwards, when we implement the CI/CD pipeline, we will change the name because we need to publish the image somewhere. All right, so we called it BSN, and then we used the tag 10.0. All right, and then of course we can pass our environment variables. So the environment variables are the following: so the database URL, the active profile, the jar version, and so forth. But it's not mandatory since we already have these default values. All right, and then we need to expose the ports. Sorry, not expose, but ports. And I want to run it 88/88, so I will not change the ports. I will use the same one, and we can assign it to a network. So the network, let's say I want to use my Spring demo. All right, so let's remove this. Okay, so the network, or like my API, also belongs to the Spring demo network. But here we have something which is super important. So we want to run this API or this container when the PostgreSQL is running. All right. So here we can add something. We can add depends on, and then it depends on PostgreSQL. All right. So when PostgreSQL is up and running, then we start running our Book Social Network API. So now all we need to do is just try to run Docker Compose app. So like I will open another terminal. So let's see, where am I? Okay, so here we have our Docker Compose and then app and -d, or like we can even run it without detached or not detached mode, but let's run it in a detached mode, and then we can check our Docker dashboard to see if everything is fine. So, but here you see that we have this one is running, and then we started the email, the mail dev BSN, and now we run the container Book Social Network API. So let's go ahead and open the dashboard and see if the container is up and running, or if something is not working fine. All right, so now if we open again our Docker desktop, we see here that we have our Book Social Network Docker Compose, and here we see our mail dev PostgreSQL, and we also see our Book Social Network API, which is running. All right, and it's exposed over the port 8088. Now if I click on it, we see that these are the logs from our application, and everything is up and running. And you can see here Tomcat started on port 8088 with the context path /API/v1. So now the application or our backend is available without the need to use, or like without the need to run it from our IDE. Now the next step is to move on and also Dockerize our front-end application, and then we will run the whole application all together without using the IDE. So like I will completely close or like terminate my IDE, and we will run it from the command line. All right, so let's move on and let's implement the front-end Dockerization. All right. Now let's go ahead and containerize our front-end. So now I'm opening my Docker file in the front-end folder, and in the same way as we did before, what we need to do in order to run our Angular application outside of our IDE. So what we need to do, first we need to install Node.js and to have npm. Then we need to install the dependencies using npm install command. And then once we build the application in production mode, we just need to copy those files, and then all we need to do is to run the application. All right, so these are the steps as we did before. Now I think, or like I'm sure you get the idea, and this is how we will be moving now. So the first thing, let's start or like define our base image, which is Node. And here I used for my application, I used Node 16. If you used a recent version or a different one, please go ahead and use it. And I will give it a tag or like a build stage or a name, and I will call it build stage. All right. Then, as always, we need to define our work directory. So it will be /app. So like building an Angular application is a little bit different from building a Spring one. So then what I need to do, I need to copy the package star.json. All right, so I will explain why it should be star.json, because in here in our front-end application we have the package.json, which defines the versions or the dependencies that we need, and we have the package log that defines the versions that were used in order to build our application, or like that the versions that are used in our application. Sorry, sometimes like I struggle to find the words. So where I want to copy it, I want to copy it in in my working directory. Then we need to run npm install. All right, and we need to install the dependencies. After that, I want to copy everything to the current working directory. So I want to copy all these files in here. I want to copy them inside my /application. Then After copying the resources, we need to move now, or like we need to build or to run our application. So let's run this command. So npm run build. So we want to build our application and we want to build it for production. So we need to pass the prod argument. Now comes the most important part. So in order to serve an Angular application, we need to have, or like we need to install or to set up a server or a web server or a reverse proxy server. So in that case, so for that also we will be using nginx. So nginx, first let me give you a brief introduction and the advantages of using nginx. So nginx is a powerful open source web server. It's also a reverse proxy server, load balancer, and an HTTP cache. So it's designed to efficiently handle high concurrency, enabling it to serve static content quickly and proxy dynamic requests to other software like application servers. So I want also to give you a little bit the history of the nginx. So it was originally developed to solve what we call the C10K problem, which is handling 10,000 simultaneous connections. So nginx has since grown to become one of the most popular web servers in the world. So now, when it comes to front-end and Angular applications, nginx is often used in several ways. First, like it serves static files. So because nginx excels at efficiently serving static files like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and image files. So for Angular applications, which is typically generates static content during the build process. So like when we build the application, it will generate some static content. So that's why we need nginx. All right. So nginx can directly serve these files to the users. Also, one of the most important things, this we will use it, please don't forget this, we will use it when we come to the step of deploying the application. So nginx also serves as a reverse proxy. So it can act as a reverse proxy to forward client requests to backend servers where the Angular application is hosted. All right, so this allows nginx to handle tasks like SSL terminations, load balancing, and caching, while the backend only serves or focuses on running the application logic. All right, so now we know what nginx is. So it was a brief introduction. Otherwise, if you are interested in learning more nginx, please let me know, and I will create also a dedicated video for that, and I can also create a complete course for nginx. Now let's move to the second stage. All right, so the second one, or like we need, as we did, we need to use nginx, and also we can use the Alpine distribution. So then what we need to do, we need to copy our nginx config file. So this is a file that we don't have yet, but I will create it afterwards. So we need to create an nginx.conf file. So this file serves as the configuration for my nginx server. All right. So what I want to copy it, when we install or when we use nginx, the location is /etc/nginx/nginx.conf. So like we want to copy it to this location, because by default nginx will search for this configuration file in this location. All right. Then after copying this, what we need to do is to copy the build resources from the previous step to the static location, or to the nginx HTML location, in order to be served. All right, so let's again use the copy command, and then from my build stage, and what I want to copy from the /app, this one right here. And when we build an Angular application, it will create a destination or a distribution file, and inside it will create another folder with the application name. So here, as you can see, here we have our, it's in the package JSON. So this is the name that will be used. All right, so that's why we need to use the same name. So let me paste it in here. All right, so I want to copy it where? To USR or like user or the current user, and then share, and then nginx/html. So that's it, and then nginx will do the rest to serve these static files that we just copied in here. So let me remove these empty lines, and now all I need to do is to expose my port. So nginx by default works on the port 80. Now when later on when we want to access the front-end application, we will not use, for example, localhost 4200, but we will use the port 80 or another port if we expose a different one from our container. Great. Now we can move on, and inside this book network UI, since we defined here that we said that we have this nginx.conf, I will create this file. So a new file, and I will call it nginx.conf. And here by default, you see that we have this nginx icon. So now first we can define some events which will be empty. Right, I can close this one. And now we want to define our HTTP. So here the first thing that we need to define is our server. So our server, first we mentioned that we want to listen to the port 80. All right, so listen, and then to the port 80. Now we need to define the different locations. So here we have one location, which is /. So the default one, like, or the empty location, or like the default location when we first query our application, what we want to serve. So here the root, or like the files, are located, as we mentioned before, in our user/share/nginx/html, and which file we want to serve first. So here our index file is the index.html. So the index.html is the file that is defined here in my application, which is this one. And you know, this is automatically will load the app root of my application. All right, so after defining the index, we can also use try files, try_files. What are the files that I want to try for my URI, and also my $URI. So URI is the current URL, / or even /index.html. So like these are the files that will be served. So then after this location, so this one is sufficient. All right, so like for the first one, or for the first try, this one is sufficient. But from my experience, I know that we need to add other things. First, we need to handle the JavaScript CSS files with the correct MIME type, because when you run so just go ahead and try it first before moving on. When you run, build the image and run the container, you will have a problem for serving the CSS and JavaScript files, because like it's not provided, or like the navigator cannot define the correct MIME type. So for that, I will add a comment here. So handle JavaScript and then CSS files with the correct MIME type. All right, so again, in the same way, I will copy this code right here and paste it. And let me first fix the indentation. And now we just need to change the location. So for the location, we need to use the tilde. So like it's a relative path, and then \dot. And here anything which is JS or CSS. So here JS or CSS, and then $. $. Means anything that comes after it. So JS/CSS, not slash, but pipe CSS. And here what I want to use, the root is always the same place. And now instead of index or try files, I will use something else. So here I will say include. What I want to include /etc, or like it's /etc/nginx/mime.type. All right, so this to serve the correct MIME type of the resources that we have. Also with nginx, we have another issue. So I will copy this code and I will explain it just right now. So we have, or we might face another issue. Like it's not always, but we might face it, and I'm sure you will face it also. So we need to catch all locations. all right, to handle the refresh or refreshes on any route. So for example, when you deploy the application and you use this configuration and then you try to refresh the page will be displayed in as a white page, all right? So we will add this small configuration in order to handle that. So here, refreshes on any route. All right, so again, I will paste this one. So again, let's define this one. So it will be the relative path and then this symbol right here. Sorry, I don't know the name. And then slash dot and then plus anything. So like when we try to refresh, we want to serve the same thing. So here we can copy this first one since we want to serve the same route. Let me fix the indentation. So we want to serve the same route, which is the user share nginx HTML, and also the index is the same, always the index.html. And also we want to try the files, and then we want to try only the URI and the slash index.html. So this is the configuration, or our nginx configuration, in order to run our application. So let's resume what we did in here. First, we defined this events, which is empty. Let's just ignore that. It's not so important for our case. And then we have the server. So here we are defining our server. So please be careful about the brackets, otherwise it will not work. And then we want to listen on the port 80, which is the default one for nginx. And here we are defining the first location, or the default one, which is the root location. And when we try, for example, to access localhost and then the port 80, automatically it will try to serve the files that are located in here. And the index is the index.html file. And here we have these try files, whether we try it for this URI or this URI slash or slash index.html. So for example, this means when I access localhost only, or localhost slash, or localhost slash index.html, it will fall in this rule right here. All right. Then we mentioned that when you use only this configuration, you will face an issue with like incorrect MIME type. So we added this configuration in here in order to define the location, or to handle the JavaScript and CSS files with the correct MIME type. And the location is like the relative path, and then anything JS and slash JS or CSS in this in the current URI or in the current location. And what we want to do is we want to serve our user, or like our root, which is slash user share nginx HTML, which is as the default. And also what we want to include this mime.type. Sorry, it should be mime.types, not type, from nginx. And then, like as I mentioned, also from my experience, because I experienced this issue before, we need to catch all the locations to handle the refresh on any route. So for example, if you are under localhost slash books slash manage, or like slash books or my books, and you do a refresh, you will end up in a white page. So that's why we added this small configuration in order to handle anything. So this it's a relative path, and when we have any refresh, so like when we try to reload something, automatically we want to serve these files, and the index is the index.html. And of course, like we want to try the files on this URI, or like index/html. And now we are ready to move on and build our image and try to add it also to our Docker Compose, and then try run the full application without the need to run it from our IDE. So after defining our Docker file and nginx conf file, all we need to do is to run or to build our image. So to build the image, first we need to navigate to our book social network UI. So we need to be inside the UI folder, this one right here, because we need to copy stuff from this location. So now let's use the same docker build command, and here let's call it UI, for example, bsn UI, and we can give it also a tag 100. Also, we need to specify the location, which is, instead of backend, we want to use the Docker file that is located in our front end. All right, so now also don't forget the dot at the end, which is the context, which is the current folder or the current working folder, which is the book network UI. So now let's hit enter and let's make it, or let's leave it, build the application. So here now it's running the npm run build prod, and then now we are running the step from nginx Alpine, and once everything is done, we will have our application. So here we see that we have a problem. Maybe we made a small typo. Let me check. All right, so yeah, this is the typo. It's Alpine, not Appline. So that's why it was mentioning here that nginx it was not found. So let's run again the command. Let me clean everything and let's rebuild again our image. And now everything should be fine. So all we need to do is to wait a little bit until everything is downloaded and the image is built, and then we will check it in our Docker dashboard. And after that, we will update our Docker Compose file and run the full application from using the Docker Compose. And let's see, and we will see together if we need to change something or to update the backend maybe, or if everything is working. So if everything is up and running, so this is going to be the jackpot. Otherwise, we will check and we will see what needs to be updated. All right, so now the application is running. Let's go ahead and check the dashboard. So now if we navigate to images, we see that we have this bsn/bsn UI, and for now it's not used yet. So let's go ahead and update our Docker Compose file and run the application. So let me open my Docker Compose file. And now again, in the same way as we did for the book, or like for the BSN API, we will add another file, which will be our BSN UI. All right, so now here in the same way, I will call this one BSN UI, and I will give it a container name. So the name, I will call it also BSN UI. And then the image, we will use the BSN/BSN UI, and we can use also the version 1.0.0. All right, so now you see my IDE is able to detect that one. By the way, I'm using the IntelliJ Ultimate version. That's why you see almost everywhere auto completion. I'm not sure if this is available on the community version or not. All right, so now for the UI, I need to expose the port. So here, ports, and I will expose 8080 over the port 80. So this is the exposed one, and this is the container port. And also I will assign it to the same network, which is Spring Demo. All right, so it should be in this way. And also this one depends on, so like it's not really mandatory, but we can say it depends on our BSN API. So like we want to start the container once the BSN API is available and ready to use. Now let's open again our terminal. Let's go back to our local and let's run again our Docker Compose app. So it will check if we have everything. So now you see this one is running, and the BSN UI is already started. So again, if we go back to our Docker dashboard, and if we navigate to containers, you see here that we have the BSN UI up and running. So now all we need to do is to go ahead and try to access the application. So here I will try to navigate to localhost and then 8080 and see if the application will run. So by default, we don't have a slash or like a default slash route, but if we navigate to /login, we see here that we have the login interface. So I will open the network and I will try to register or to create an account. Also, I will open my mail dev. So I think it's on 180. Yeah, so this is the mail dev. Here we see that we have nothing yet. Now, if I register a new user, and let's call it test, for example, test at mail.com and a password. So now if I click on create account, I should see an email coming or the registration working correctly. But here we have a course issue. So first here I have an old token. So let me go ahead and clean it up. And also I will clean up the network and send again the create account. But we still see that we have a course error. This means that this URL, this localhost 8080, is not allowed in my backend. So now if I go back to my backend, and here, let me remind you that in our backend configuration, if I go to main and then Java security, I think it's in the config and it's in the beans config. So here, this is where we defined our course filter. So the course filter only allows requests coming from the localhost 4200. But since our application now is running on the port 8080, localhost 8080, so I need to change that. So instead of using a singleton list, I will do erase or like list.off, and I will add also the new one. So here I will copy this and I will just change the port. So this one is 8080. Of course, now what we need to do, we need to build again another version of my backend. So to build a version, what I need to do first, go to the POM, update this one. So like I will just increase the version since I introduced a small fix. What I need to do is to build again my application. So here, if I need first to navigate to build my container. So let me use this UI, and here I can navigate to my book network, and now I can use the command. Yeah, so this is for the backend, and let me change the tag to 101, and let's build again the new image. So this will include the change that we introduced just right now to allow this new URL, which is the localhost 8080. And meanwhile, I will also update my Docker Compose. So the Docker Compose, all I need to do is for the book API to use the new version, which is 101. So let me see if this one is done. So it's still building. And once this one is done, all I need to do is to run again my Docker Compose app. So let me go back here and let me prepare the command docker compose app -d, and this will pull the new version. So like we don't need to stop the container. All we need to do is to rerun again the docker compose app command, and this will pull the new version from here. So which is the book, or like the BSN API, and the image is now called BSN 101. All right, so let's wait a few moments until the image is up and the image is ready. So yeah, okay, I was going to say let's fast forward it or wait for it, but now it's ready. So now if I do docker compose app, you see that this one is started and also this one is started. And to make sure, let's go back to our Docker dashboard. And here it seems that the application is not up and running. So I know the reason why. So if I go back, so this one we will fix it and we will automate it when we come to the pipeline. All right, so here for the Docker, for the backend, we have the version 100. So we need to change this one to 101, because when we try to copy the, when we try to run the Java jar with the book network 100, we don't have that version available. Or we can also, like, we could have passed it as an argument to our Docker build command, but it's fine. I think we can overcome this. I will build again the image. And now let's see, now everything should be fine. And if I do docker compose app again, we should see that we have now our book API up and running, which is the case right here. All right. So now if we go back here and if we go back to our browser, and now I think if I send, it should work without the need to refresh. All right, so now it's working and the register is working fine. Also the mail, let me refresh here. We don't see any emails. So we have also, I guess, another problem. So let's go ahead, and if we go back to our Docker container, Docker dashboard, now we can whether use the command line to check the logs of the BSN API, or we can just do it from here. So now we see here that we already have an exception. Something is not working. So here we have Thymeleaf exception, the template, or like error resolving name activate account. So here I think it's when it comes to sending the email. So I will check my email service, and here let's say why we have the activate account. So email template, and if I check this one, all right, yeah, now I get it. So here the issue is this .name is the default method from the enum. All right, so it will return the enum name. So in this case, it will return activate account. But what we want is this activate account which is this name. So like maybe we can rename it to template, for example, or template name, but here all we need to do is to use get name instead of just name. All right. Now for that, of course, we need to rebuild again our application. So let's call it 102. And again, in our pom.xml, we need to change the version of our application or of our API. So let's call it 102. And again, so now like the build will be much faster since we are not rebuilding all the layers from scratch. So it will, because we still have the dependencies and all this stuff. Now like the build should be a bit faster. So I will stop it because also I didn't change the version in here. So now let's rebuild again our backend. All right, so now the image is available. So just let's restart our Docker Compose, but first we need to update this version. We need to use the 02 and let's do Docker Compose up. Again, let's check our dashboard and everything seems to be running fine. And now let's register another user or a new user. So let's go back to the browser. Let's go back to login or like to create an account, maybe something like that. And the password, let's say password. All right, so now if I click on create account, so now I should expect an email. So let's check the logs. It seems not to be working. So here it says connection refused, which is trying to point to the local host. And since we are inside a Docker, so like the containers, they need to communicate using the container name. All right, so here let's come to a different phase or like a different setup. So what we will do here, we will use I will use the Gmail or my Gmail to send emails instead of using the mail dev. So mail dev, we need it to run locally or like to try out things. But now since we want to deploy the application and use it, so let's go ahead and use Gmail as a provider. All right, so here for the host, now it will be SMTP. So this is smtp.gmail.com. So this will be my host and the port, it will be 465. And here for the username, I will use my username or like my Gmail account and password. So it's not the password that you use to log into your Gmail, but you need to generate one. So like all you need to do is to go to manage your account and then security. And of course you need to set up two-factor authentication, and then you will be able to generate a password to use Gmail as an SMTP server. All right, so here I will change it later on. So like I will not provide this neither in the code or in the recording of this video. So please go ahead and use your own. And now like for the properties, we can keep the same properties. We have the SMTP trust. So here for the SMTP auth true, and also like we can say trust star, we can trust anything or even we can remove it. And also we will add a few other things. So we will add an SSL configuration and we want to enable it since this is required by Gmail or by Google. And then we can move this trust in here. So in this way. So here, as you can see, SMTP authentication should be enabled. And then we have SSL at the same level of as authentication. And we want to enable the SSL. So SSL should be enabled, and we have the trust star. So we can say we can trust anything. And then we have the start TLS enabled true as before. So we can also now we can remove the connection timeout. We can also remove timeout and write timeout. And also we need to introduce another property as the same level, which is the protocol. So the protocol that we want to use is the SMTP. All right, so this is the configuration that we need. I will change this one in a few seconds, and then I will build another image. So maybe let's prepare this one. So here for the pom.xml, I will use version 3. So this will be the version 3, and then I will provide it. I will show you how to pass an argument when you build the Docker image. And then what we need to do next, I think we can also go to Docker Compose. So here it's already 103. So this is the image or like the tag that we will build in a few moments. All right, so now we are done with the configuration, and then we will use our SMTP. So like for now, when we sign up a user, I need to use a real email so I can receive the email there. All right, so now let's go ahead and build the image. All right, so now in order to build the image, and now like instead of updating the Docker file and do all these manual things, so all we need to do is to provide another argument, which is build --build -arg, and then we need to pass the app version, which is for now, as we updated the pom.xml file, it is 103, and now we have the tag, which is also 103 to be compliant with the version of the jar version. And now all we need to do is to build again our image. So it will be built and then it will be available. And the next step is just to rerun, or like to do a Docker Compose down and the Docker Compose up. Docker Compose down just to make sure that everything is down. And now I will restart my my containers. And if we go to our Docker dashboard, and if I go back to containers, we see here that we have the PostgreSQL. This one we can remove it later on, and we have the API and the UI up and running. So now let's go back to the browser and let's try again to do a login. All right. All right, now if we go back to the create account page, and I filled already the form, and all I need to do is to create an account. Now I should receive an email containing the activation code, which is already received, and let me show it to you. So here, this is the email that I received, and this is my Gmail account, or like the other Gmail account that I configured. And here we have account activation. Let me also zoom in a bit so you can see the full message. So here we have like my first name and last name as specified in the form, and here this is the new code, which is 136. So let me also bring it back here. So the code is 136389. So now the activation successful. Now I should be able to log within, or like to log in with my recently created account. So now I have the application up and running, and as you can see here, it's running on the port localhost 8080, which is not the other, or like the 4200, which is the default one when you run the application locally. So maybe let's just quickly try something, and I will try to create a new book. So let's say this one, and here let's say Python book and Ryan Turner. So I have it here. Let's use something and share me. And now if I click on save, we should see the book getting saved. Great. Now we learned together how to containerize or Dockerize an application. So we saw that the application now is running outside of our IDE, and it doesn't depend on anything except having Docker installed and up and running. So the next part is to deploy the application. So we will see together how to design a pipeline, what are the necessary jobs and steps in order to build a full pipeline, starting from building the project, compiling the project, running the tests, also building a Docker image, pushing the Docker image, and then deploying the application to the VPS. The VPS will contact or will connect to the Docker Hub and pull the image, and then it will run the application and it will be available for you. During the implementation of this CI/CD pipeline, I will show you all the necessary configurations and how to configure everything in order to have the application up and running and to have a full pipeline working for the backend as well as the frontend. So for that, we will be building two different workflows, one workflow for the backend and another workflow for the frontend. So the backend will be triggered when we do or when we push changes to the backend part. The frontend as well, it will be triggered when we push changes to the frontend part. So like when we push something to the backend, we only need to build the backend and deploy it. When we push it to the frontend, we only need to build the front end and again push it. Also, I will show you how to do versioning, how to extract the version and do all the necessary stuff. Before we dive, just one small thing. Again, just a quick reminder, if you're new to my channel, just go ahead and subscribe and also share the video, drop a comment and leave a thumbs up. So also the most important thing is if you have an old laptop that you are not using and it's powerful enough that you can use it as a server, don't drop it, don't throw it away. keep it, and you will know during the video why. I will explain to you how I'm configuring my own VPS at home. And also, if you find this interesting and if you have a laptop and you want to use it, please drop a comment and I will create a dedicated video and I will showcase how to create your own VPS at home. Alright, so now it's time to go deeper and to dive into the implementation of our CI/CD pipeline. First of all, let's have a look on the pipeline that we will build. First, we will start with the backend pipeline. So here, this is the global overview of our pipeline. Now let's go into the details. And before that, I would like to mention something or few things that are super important. So here, when we see this job, or like this, we call it a job. So we see something like this, as you can see in the icon in here. So this means that this job will run on a different or on a separated machine. So like imagine this, that it will be running on a completely different laptop or a completely different machine. So here, as if we see that we have two jobs or many jobs, and all of them, they might run at the same time, like they might be running in parallel. So this means that each job will run on a separate machine. So like here, now I will start explaining things. So this is the first remark or the first comment that I want to give you, so you can understand the rest, and also you will get the global picture of creating a CI/CD pipeline and even deploying the application later on. All right, so now first thing, what we need to do, let's go back and let's forget about the pipeline, forget about everything, and let's imagine on your local machine how you would do this. So the first thing, as we did for the Docker, for Dockerizing the application, first we need to compile the project, we need to run the unit tests, and then we need to build the package, the application. Afterwards, we created a Docker image, and then we will add an extra step, which is pushing the Docker image to DockerHub, and then we need to deploy, or like we need to read or to pull the image from that DockerHub. So what we did locally was compiling the project, running the unit test. Well, we don't have unit tests, but we assume that we have tests. And then we build the project using the Maven clean package. And then we created a Docker image using the Docker file that we configured together. And then the Docker file, it's on the local machine, it's available directly for you on your local machine. So for example, if we want to make it available for the public, all we need to do is to push that image to a repository or to a registry. So that's why we will use DockerHub as our registry. And then how to deploy the application? All we did is update the Docker Compose, update the versions, and then all we needed to do is to run Docker Compose app on our local machine. Now let's talk about these steps. So here, as you can see, we have compile project and unit test. So these two jobs, they will run in parallel. So like, as you can see, there is no dependency between compile project and unit test. Why? We can run them in parallel. So first, this is a kind of an optimization. So we, for example, like we do not need to wait for the compile project in order to run the unit test, as well as if we have, for example, integration tests and any other type of tests, we can run all of them in parallel. All right, so we compile the project and we also at the same time we run the unit tests. But now to build the backend, we depend on both of them. So to build the backend, we need to wait for the compile project to be done, as well as all the tests and all other jobs that might be required before, or like to be executed before we come to the build backend job. All right, so building the backend. So once we build the backend, then we build the Docker image and then we deploy the application. Now let's go back to each job. So, you know, I already explained that in the CI/CD or the GitHub Actions CI/CD video. So please go ahead and check it. Here, what we want to do, or like what is a job? A job is, as I mentioned, is imagine it or consider it as a machine or a laptop, and we want to run several steps inside that job or like within that job. So here you see that we have checkout code every time, almost like, or at each job we have always checkout code, because we need first to check out the code since the job will be running on a separate machine. So here, if we check out the code the first time, the code is only available in this machine, but it's not available in the second job or the third, and so forth. So here, the first step, we need to check out the code, and then we need to set up the JDK. So the JDK, because of course we need some tools in order to run or to compile our application. After setting up the JDK, we need to run the Maven clean compile in order to compile our project and make sure that everything is working fine. All right, now let's move to the other job, which is unit tests. Again, reminder, the unit test will also be running on a separate machine. So first we need to check out the code. We need to set up the JDK, and then we run the command Maven clean test to run the unit test of our application. Once these two jobs are done, we can move on to the build backend. So again, we need to check out the code, set up the JDK, and run the command Maven clean install or Maven clean package. So we have our application or package ready to use. Once this is done, we can move on to the next job. So the next job is to build the Docker image. First, again, we need to check out the code. We need to set up the JDK, and we need again to extract or to run the command in order to build our project and to have the jar file available. And then we need to extract the project version. So we mentioned before that we saw when we did it locally, we need every time to change the version, and when we build the Docker image, we need to provide that version. But I mentioned before that we can automate this step. So here comes the extraction of the project version. Then we need to log into DockerHub, and then we need to build the image and then push it to DockerHub. Once this done, so in order to perform this task, first before moving to the next job, we need to do a few things. First, we need to read secrets. So for example, the Docker login and the Docker password or the Docker access token, we should not expose them in the code, or in Git or on GitHub. So this is what I mean in the code. So we need to store them somewhere. So that's why we need to use secrets manager, or we can use for that case, we will be using the GitHub Actions to store secrets and read them from there. So this is why we have here read secrets. Once everything is done, this is where comes the push step, or the push command is to build and push the image to DockerHub. All right. Then when we come to deploying the backend, all we need to do is to connect or to perform an SSH connection to our remote server, which is not our local machine, but a real remote server that I already have and already configured, and we need to perform an SSH connection. So first, what we need to do, we need to create a deployment folder, and then we need to copy our Docker Compose file, set the environment variables that we need, and then deploy the application or just run the Docker Compose app, and it will, this server will connect again to DockerHub and pull the images and run the application. So this is a global overview of our CI/CD pipeline that we will build starting from now. So before I will give you an overview, or I will show you the server that I already installed and configured, and also I will show you how to generate a GitHub token, sorry, not a GitHub but a DockerHub token, and also how we can store secrets into GitHub. And even I will show you how, if you want to create a custom runner. So I will also show you the steps to do that. All right, now let me talk to you about the infrastructure or the server that I created. So here, this is the address of my server. So please, for your case, don't use this one because it's a local server. So, well, it's not a local server, it's not a local machine, but I have an old laptop that I configured to be my server at home. All right, so I don't need to buy a VPS or to have a real VPS or a distant one. So I'm just using an old laptop as my local server. All right, so it's a VPS. And on that server, I installed Proxmox, and the version that I have currently is 8.1.4. By the way, if you don't know Proxmox, and if you are interested in this part, and if you want, or if you have an old laptop and you don't want to throw it away and you want to use it as your own server, please comment down below and I will create a dedicated video to show you and to showcase how to install or how to create your own home server. All right, so here, as you can see on this left hand side, I have two virtual machines. So both of them are running Linux server, so it's Ubuntu server. So the first one, this one acts as my GitHub runner. So this is the machine that I will be using in order to run my my jobs and my CI/CD pipeline. And this one, which is the pink color, is my VPS. So this is the real server that where I will deploy the application. All right, so as you can see, this one is available on this port and this one is available on this port. All right, so now this is the global overview of my setup. So as I mentioned, if you need or if you want to learn how to set up Proxmox and how to use it, please just drop a comment and I will create a dedicated video for that. Before we start implementing and creating our CI/CD pipeline, as I mentioned before, we need to prepare a few things. So the first thing, if you want to use DockerHub as a registry, as I do, so please go ahead, create your account and then log in. After that, click on the icon or on your profile right here, and then go to my profile, go to my account. All right, and then click on security. And here, all you need to do is to create a new access token. So just give it a name and then click on generate. Once the token is generated, copy it, because otherwise you will not be able to see it again. So copy that token and then keep it somewhere safe, and we will see how to use it or how to use it exactly in the next steps. So this step is so simple. Also, this will be your DockerHub username. So this also is important since you have it available. So no need to paste it or to keep it somewhere else. But for the token, once it's generated, please don't forget to copy it. Otherwise, once you close the modal, you will no longer have access or be able to copy again the access token. All right, now we can move on and talk about the GitHub Actions or the secrets. So here, this is the repository. Okay. By the way, thank you for starting the repo. Also, if you see again this video and if you did not rate the repo, please go ahead and leave a star. So now, if we go here to settings, and then if you scroll down, you have here secrets and variables. And then you click on actions. So these are the secrets and variables for the actions that are used by GitHub. So like we have actions here, and these are the secrets where we store them. So now in order to create a secret, all you need to do is to click on new repository secret, give it a name, and then give it a value and click add secret. All right. So the steps are simple. So now let me show you what are the secrets that I created. So first I have my DockerHub token, okay? And then I have my DockerHub username. By the way, I need to mention that. So I'm the only one who has access and who is able to update and see the secrets, since like you need to be the owner of the repo in order to do that, all right? Otherwise, like you need to go ahead, fork the project and then create your own secrets and the pipeline will be running automatically. All right, so let's go back here. As I mentioned, we have I have my DockerHub token, the one I just generated from here, and I pasted in here. So the DockerHub username is this one. So like it's not a secret. And also here I just created or like saved my email host name, which is smtp.gmail.com. And then I have the password and the username. So the username is the email that I'm using, and the password is the one I also used it before when we showcased in the previous part, when we showcased how to send an email using Gmail. All right, so for this one, you can just forget about it because like I used it before, but it's not needed now. And here, this is the VPS IP. So the VPS IP is this one. So here, this is our VPS. So this is the VPS IP. So the VPS IP is the IP address of your VPS, of your virtual private server.
And then you have the VPS username. So the VPS username, when you set up your VPS and you install Ubuntu server or even Ubuntu like the normal distribution, you will be asked to provide a username. So this is the username that you need to set up and to provide in here. All right. So now we have everything, and I showed you everything. Now we can move on to the implementation of our CI/CD pipeline for the backend. Later on, after that, we will also implement it for the front end, and I will show you all the changes that we need to introduce in order to have everything up and running. Let's move on. All right, so now let's start implementing our CI/CD pipeline. So the first thing that we need to do, we need to introduce a few changes to our Docker file. So we will start with the backend, and then we will move to the front end, and I will show you also what needs to be changed there. So here what we want to do, we have here this configuration, right? So you remember this one, and this one is working fine. Now we have our active profile Java version, which is also okay. But now we need to provide something else. Okay, so what we need to provide is, as we mentioned before, also we saw it in the secrets, we need to provide the host name, username, and password. All right, so I will create environment variables for that, and I will call it email host name, and then equal. So, and I will just say, for example, missing host name, and let me duplicate it 2 times. And here, for example, it will be email user underscore name. And here, let's call it missing username. And now we have email password. All right. So here, let's call it also missing password. So missing password, this means if we forget to provide these environment variables, automatically we know that that the application will not be able to send emails, and we will see that in the logs of our container. So now after that, we also need to introduce some other changes to our application.yaml or our application dev.yaml. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So here, if I go to book network and then source and then main, resources, and application dev. All right, so now in the application dev, so Spring allow us also to read properties from the environment variables. Since we defined the environment variables in here, so we have here host name. I'll just copy them to have them in my available for me. So Command Z, and now let's add this. So now all I need to do is to do the following. So $ and then brackets, and here I would like to use here host name. All right, so Spring will try to read an environment variable from the system called email host name. All right, so I will do the same for the username. So the username, it's user underscore name, and also for the password, it's user underscore password. So now we have the changes that are required for our application. Okay, perfect. So now we see here in our application, we have, if you remember, when we deployed the application locally, we faced a course issue. So now I don't need to go back or like to deploy, show you the error. So like, you know, the flow, since we saw it all together. And here we have in our beans config, we have allowed origins. All right. So we have allowed origins, which is a list of these following URLs. So these URLs, it's really not recommended to have it like this, but we can also externalize the configuration for that one. So what I will do here first, I will go to this application security, or like this part of our configuration, and then after mailing, for example, as at the same level of mailing, so like it will be application and then course. So here I will create something, I will call it course. All right, and then I will call it origins. So what are the allowed origins for my course configuration? And this I will use it later on in this beans config file. All right, so here let me first copy these ones. So also I can remove the quotes, and you don't need this extra space after the comma. So here, let's say that we would like to introduce those ones. All right. So now what I need to do also, since I know the IP address of my VPS, which is the following as mentioned before. So this is the IP address of my VPS. So let me copy it. And now I can go back here. So for your case, all you need to do is just to get the IP address of your VPS. So here, HTTP and then : / and now instead of localhost, I need my IP address. And then I know that the port is 8088. This one is for the backend. And also I will copy it and I will clone this one, paste it again, and it will be 8080 for the front end. All right. So this is the front end and this is the backend. So the backend, I think we do not need it, but just in case, I will leave it in here. So now we have our origins. I will copy the path for this one, and then I will go back to my beans config. So for the beans config, all I need to do is to dynamize this part and make it able to read the information or to read the properties from my application properties. All right. So now one of the things I will just set this one, or like I will comment this line, and I will explain to you later why we need to comment this out. All right. And then what I want to do, I will scroll up here, and now I will use the value annotation in order to inject my property. All right. So it will be $ and then brackets. And now I want to add something. So here I will add colon. This means that if we don't have this property available, the default value will be star. All right. So that's why I commented out the set allowed credentials. Well, this one, by the way, this one is not recommended. Okay. So like you should not allow star, or like you should not allow anyone to access your backend. You need to secure it, but this is just to avoid any case, since this is just a demo application. So just to avoid any type of issues. So that's why I added star right here. Otherwise I would remove it and keep it this way. Okay. But I already mentioned that, so you know that this is not recommended for production. All right. So then I will create a list of string. So Spring is able to convert these values. This list of values, it's comma separated, is able to convert it to a list of strings. All right. So I will call it allowed origins. And then I will use these allowed origins in here. And that's it. So now my origins are automatically fetched from the properties and set in here. Also, I will just introduce another change, just as I mentioned, in order to avoid all kind of issues later on when we deploy the application. So here I will mention, or like I will remove all these headers, and for the headers I will also allow star. So I will allow all the headers. The same for the methods. All right. So like I know the methods that we are using in our application, like from the front end, which is get, post, put, and also we have patch. But just as I mentioned, to avoid any kind of issue, I will just remove this one. So here I will say not recommended for production. So like now I have a proof on you that I already mentioned that. The same in here. So this one is also not recommended for production. Okay. All right. So now we configured our application, like globally speaking or generally speaking. So this one I can also bring it back to 0. And now we can move on to the implementation of our CI/CD pipeline. All right. So I will reduce everything. And here, in order to have, or like to trigger automatically the CI/CD pipeline using GitHub Actions, all we need to do is to create a folder, and let's call it GitHub. Not let's call it, but we need to call it GitHub. All right. So if you choose a different name, it will not be automatically picked up. So GitHub Actions, they will search for a folder called GitHub, and inside that folder, we need to create another one called workflows. It's not workflow, it's workflows with an S. All right. And here we can create now any file or any YAML file that defines our CI/CD pipeline. So here I will call this one pipeline backend.yaml. And all right, now we can start. First, I will give it a name. I will give my pipeline a name. and I will call it BSN Backend API Pipeline. All right. So now we need to define when we want to trigger the build or when we want to trigger this pipeline. So here on, and then push. And here when we want to trigger the pipeline on a push, so when we push a code, so this means what? I want to I can specify on which branch I want to trigger the pipeline. So here, let's say, for example, branches, and here we can specify a list of branches. So let's say, for example, CI/pipeline. So then I will move the code to a different branch before pushing it. So here, when we push some changes to the CI pipeline, or if you just remove the branches, it will be triggered on any push that you do in your code. All right. So here I will just limit it to the CI pipeline branch. With the branches, also we can specify something else. So here we can specify paths. So paths. This means that I want to trigger this pipeline backend when I perform some changes in the code in specific paths. So here for the paths that we want, so if we push any change to the book network folder, in this case, I want to trigger the pipeline. Or if I push change to Docker/backend folder, this means that we are changing this Docker file. This means also that we need to trigger the pipeline. Also, the next one is if we do some change to the Docker Compose YAML. So here, we cannot be more specific for this one, but if we perform a change to the Docker Compose YAML file, this means also that we want to perform or to run our pipeline. And finally, if we update this pipeline backend.yaml, this means that we want also to trigger the pipeline. So we have four paths where we want to trigger the pipeline. So the first one, as I mentioned, is the book network, and then /**. So any file that will be changed under the book network folder. Then we have Docker/backend/**. We can be precise and say Docker file right here, but this should be also fine, ***, since we know that we have only our file or our Docker file there. Also, the next one we said this is we want to trigger it on our Docker Compose.yaml, right? And finally, if we push any change to .github/workflows and anything **backend.yaml. So this is I'm talking here about the current file. So now, as we mentioned before, we have several jobs. So now we need to define our jobs. All right. So here, the first job is to compile the project. So let's call it compile, and then we will give it a name. So, but first, before giving it a name, as I mentioned, I already have my own runner, so I'm not using the GitHub runner. So for your case, you need, for example, the runs on, you can specify Ubuntu. All right, so Ubuntu is the default runner, but you need to specify it. So this is the default runner when you want to use the GitHub action runners. Okay, but for my case, I will use my self-hosted runner. I will show you later on how if you want to create a self-hosted runner. And now I will give it a name. Okay, so let's call it compile project. So this is the first job. Now we mentioned that each job has steps. So now we can define the steps. So in order to define the step, we have name. So it's name. And here, as we mentioned, check out code. So now each step can be whether an action. So we can use an existing action or a custom action or our own action, or we can run a command. Okay. But for this case, or for many steps in here, we will be using predefined actions. So here uses, and we want to use actions. So this is the one of the verified and the provided GitHub actions, and it's called checkout at v4. So at this time, or at the time of recording this video, the most recent one is the v4. Now, when we use an action, we can also specify or pass few parameters. or arguments. So here I want my fetch depth to be 0. This means like I don't want to check out the sub branches. I want just to check out the current one. All right, so this is the first step. The second one, name, and as we mentioned before, set up JDK. So to set up the JDK, we can also use an action which is ready and available for us, which is called actions/setup JDK. So setup JDK, and then I think the current version is v4. I hope it's not it did not change. And also we can now specify arguments. So the arguments, first we can specify which Java version. So since our project is using Java 17, so we can specify Java 17 as the version of our JDK. And also we can specify the distribution, and we can say, for example, Corretto. So this is the distribution that we will be using. Now, after setting up the JDK, the next step is to compile the project. So I will create another step, and I will call it compile project. And now I will not use an action. So here I want to show you if in case we want to do something different, or like we want to run a custom command. So here we will use run. Okay. So with run, you can specify the command as in one line in here, but if you have multiple commands, all you need to do pipe, and then you can break the line, and now you can specify or provide the list of the commands that will be executed one after the other. So the first thing, I need to navigate to my book network. Why? Because when I check out the code, I'm already at this level. Okay, at the root level. So I need to navigate or to change the directory to the book network. Then all I need to do is to run maven clean compile. So here mvn wrapper. So I will use the wrapper that I have already in here, that exactly as we did on our local machine. And now I will call the command clean compile. All right, so the first job is done. Nice. Okay, so now let's implement the next one. So the next one, we mentioned that running the unit tests. I know that we don't have any unit tests available, or like any unit tests implemented in our application, but let's assume that, and let me show you how to do it. So here, let me close this. And now let's call it unit-tests. So now runs on, of course, since every job, as I mentioned, it runs on a separate machine. So here we need to say self-hosted. By the way, you can put, or like you can create only one job with multiple steps. But for me, I just want to show you how we can automate, or how we can optimize a little bit the performance by using parallelism of building, or like while building the pipeline. So let's give it a name, and we will call it unit tests as we mentioned in our diagram. Now we need to specify the steps. So the first one will be checkout. So I can copy the code from here. So here, let me fix the typo, checkout code. So we need to check out the code, and then we need to set up the JDK, and also we need to run the unit tests. So let me paste it in here. So we have checkout code. In the same way, also setting up the JDK. And now instead of compile code, let's say, or like compile project, let's say running unit tests. And again, we need to navigate inside the book network, since each job is running on a separate machine. So we need to navigate again there, and we need to run the command maven clean test. And that's it. All right. So now let's move on and let's implement the next job, which is build. Now we want to build our project. And again, it runs on self-hosted, and let's give it the name build backend, for example. And now we need to specify or to provide the steps. So for the steps, again, we can use the one that we already copied. And here, instead of compile, it will be package. All right. So now let's call this one build backend or build project. So like you can choose any name you want. So build project or build backend. All right, so now this is, we are done with this one. So I can copy, I guess, well, let's do it manually. Okay, now we move to the next job. The next job is to build the Docker image. All right, so let's call it build-image. And then let's give it a name, build Docker image, and runs on self-hosted. After that, so what we need to do, again, we need to do some stuff, but building the image, it really depends on something. But here, yeah, I just now remember the word depends on. So we say that the compile and unit test can be executed like in a parallel way. So like both of them, they can be running at the same time. But the build step, we need to wait for the compile and unit test. So that's why here we need to add needs. So the needs, we need compile. So we need to provide it as a list. So compile and unit tests. So here all you need to do is to provide the job name, right? So like the ID or the alias you gave for this job. So this means that this build step depends on the compile and unit tests. All right, so now in order to build the image, of course, we need to wait for the compile to be done, for the build to be done. So here I will add depends on, or needs, sorry, depends on is for Docker Compose, but here this one needs the build job to be done. All right, so now let's define the steps, and the steps, as always, we need to check out the code, and then we will extract the project ID. So here, let me copy this, and I can remove the unnecessary stuff. All right, so here we have checkout code and setup JDK. So now I will add another step, and I will call it extract version, extract project version. Now I will give my step an ID because I will need this ID later on, and I will call it extract_version. And now I need to run a command. So to run the command, first I need to navigate inside my book network folder, and afterwards we can use a Maven command that will help us to extract the version. So here I will write the command, and then I will explain it to you step by step. So here you need these codes, and then I will do echo, and then I will create a variable called version equals, and then $. And now inside I will run the command. So I will use the Maven wrapper, MVN wrapper, -q, and then -d exec.executable equals, and now we can extract the project version. All right, so executable equals, now we use simple codes. Let's say echo means we want to print that version. And now also we need to execute, and then the args equals, again simple quotes, and then $, and brackets, which is our project.version. I will explain to you this one in a few moments. And also we need to provide something which is non-recursive, and then exec::exec. Once we run this command, we want to output it or to save it in the GitHub outputs. So the GitHub outputs is $, and then GitHub_output. And I will show you later on how we can use this output in order to read it. But first, let's run this command directly in our project. So here, let me clean this, and I will navigate to my book network. So now if we run this command, it will print out here the project version. So as you can see, the project version that we have in our pom.xml. So let me open the pom.xml. So this is 104. So for example, if I change it to something like this, and I run again the command, so it will print the project version. So this means that I want to use the Maven wrapper, since it's a Maven command, -q, and then executable. So like what I want to do, after executing this, I want to echo it. I want to display the result. All right, so execution args, I want to extract the project version, and I want it to be non-recursive, since all I need to do is to get the current project argument and then execute. All right, so now we can go back to the implementation, and then we store the output of this command in the GitHub output, since we need to use it, or we want to use it later on. Now let's go back here. The next step is login to DockerHub. So login to DockerHub. And to log into DockerHub, we can use an action. So uses, we have an action called docker, and then /login-action. And I think the version or the current one is v3. So let's use v3 unless it has changed. Whether if you can manage it, otherwise just ping me and I will update it. So I'm fixing a typo right here. And now we can pass few parameters. So username and password. All right, so the username, we need to read it from the secrets. Now to read something from the GitHub secrets or the GitHub Actions secrets, all we need to do is secrets dot and then the secret name that we created in GitHub Actions. So the secret, we called it DockerHub_username. I can copy this one for faster typing, and this one DockerHub password or token. I think I named it token. All right, so now we have we implemented the login step. So this means, like, imagine that we are doing all these steps manually. So like we check out the code, set up the JDK, we extract the version, we have the jar file, we log into DockerHub. So because we need, even like on your local machine, you need to log into DockerHub, and then you can build and push the image. All right. So now the next step is, as I mentioned, is build and push to DockerHub. All right, so this one again, I will use an action. So it's also from Docker, and it's called, I hope I remember, Docker push action. Yes, I think it's Docker push action. So if it's wrong, we will find out later on when we run the pipeline. All right, so now we need to pass few parameters. Okay, so the parameters, since we performed a Docker login, we do not need to log in again here. So here we need to provide the context. So if you remember, when we run the build image locally, we had to navigate to the book network. All right, so we needed to navigate to the book network folder, and then we executed the Docker build. Now this is what we call the context. So our context is book network. So this is important if you have subfolders, or if you are using the monorepo approach, like my case. Otherwise, if you have the Docker file available directly under your code, all you need to do is to change this one with dot instead of providing the folder name. All you need to do is dot. All right, next we need to specify the file. Since we mentioned, we used the command docker build -t, we gave it a tag, and then -f to provide the file. So the file is under Docker, and then backend, and after that it's Docker file. So the file that we want to run or to execute is the Docker file. So here we have also a push true or false. So this will build the image. All right, if we specify this flag push true, it will push the image to DockerHub using, of course, this username and token. All right, so don't worry, it will not push it to somewhere else, but it will use the username and password, or the username and token that you already provided. So here there is something which is super important. First, let me add this build tags, build args, as we did before. So the build args, we have different args. Okay, so the build args, first we have profile. So you need to specify or to provide them exactly as you named them in your Docker file. So the profile, let's say dev, and we have the app version. So the app version, now we will use this output. All right, so now we need to use the output. So for the app version, simply it's something like this. So $, and then double brackets, and all we need to do is steps dot extract underscore version, which is the ID of this step. That's why I gave it an ID. So steps dot extract version dot outputs, since each step has its own outputs, and then version, which is the name that we mentioned in here. So like here we to this variable we stored the output of this Maven command. All right, so now the args are complete. Let's also add some tags. So the tags, all we need to do is the following. So here, since locally we build it in this way, so like we said, it's bsn/bsn API or bsn UI and so on and so forth. But now for the tags, we want to make it or like we want to link it to the username. So I will copy this one. So the tags, it will be username slash and bsn-API. So I will call it API, and of course I need this version. All right, so like I want it to be tied to the version. Also, if you want to, so I will have always like a tag and something called latest. All right, so I will be pushing two tags. So like first one, for example, it will be 100, 101, 1.2, something like that. And I will always have something called latest. All right, so these are the tags. But since our VPS or our server is a Linux server, we need to specify the platform. All right, so here we can specify platforms, and because like building an image which is compatible with Linux is not the same to build an image which is compatible with Windows or macOS and so on and so forth. So for this one, we need to specify or to provide the platform. So it's Linux/AMD64. So if, for example, if this AMD64 is not compatible with your server, you will see the error, and then all you need to do is to change this platform's value. All right, so that's super great. Now let me clean up this. Now what we need to do next is to implement the deploy step. So deploy, and then I will call it deploy backend, and of course runs on self-hosted. And then all I need to do, as I mentioned before, so first this needs the build image step. So we cannot deploy if the image is not built correctly or if something is wrong. So we need to wait for that. And now let's define the steps. So the first step is create deployment folder. All right. So now in order to create this deployment folder, all I need to do is to run an SSH command to my VPS. All right. So here, all I need to do is to do an SSH. And now I need to use my secrets, which is secrets.vps username at, so like in order to perform an SSH command, it's always SSH username at IP address. All right, so like the IP address is something like 123.123.123.123. All right, but before that you need to establish an SSH communication between or like to your VPS, or you can even pass the private key as a parameter, and you will not be asked to provide the username, the password for the user that you are using. All right, so let me copy this one. And here we have VPS username, and here we need also the VPS underscore IP. All right, and the command that we want to execute is the following: is make directory mkdir -p. -p means if the directory exists, don't override anything, just skip it. And I will call it CI/CD. All right, so I will create a folder and I will call it CI/CD. All right, so then, as we mentioned before, the next step is to copy the Docker compose file. So Docker compose file. I'm missing a space. And now run. Again, we need to run some commands. And now instead of using SSH, we have a command called SCP. So like secure copy. And to secure copy, we also need the VPS. So what do we want to copy? We want to copy our Docker compose file .yaml to this location. We want to copy it to the server, and then our folder that we created before, CI/CD, and then we can keep the same name, which is docker compose.yaml. All right, let's fix the typo. So it's docker compose. And now we have, or like we implemented the next step, which is copying the docker compose file. Now, all we need to do next is to set the environment variables and deploy the application. So now I will create the final step, which is set environment variables and deploy. And now again, I will run a command. So now I will use a pipe since I have multiple commands. So first I need to SSH into my VPS, all right? Because here, why each time I need to SSH, because when we run the command, we just run it and then we move on. So like we stop the connection. So we stop or we terminate the connection with the VPS. That's why at each step we need to do SSH. All right. So now we need to perform multiple commands inside our VPS. So in order to do that, we need to add this EOF and then EOF at the end. So this means that all the commands that I will run in between, they will be under this session. All right. So first I need to set, as mentioned in here, we need to set some environment variables. So we call that one email hostname, email username, and email password. So I think I have them, or I can copy them from my Docker file just to move faster. All right, let's go back here. And now let's paste all these 3 lines and add export in front of them. So export user host name, username, email host name, email username, and email password. And this equals $, and then brackets. And all we need to do is to use secrets dot email host name, email username, and email password, as we specified them in our configuration for the GitHub Actions secrets. So after setting up the secrets, what we need to do, we need to navigate inside the CI/CD folder, which is this one that we created previously. Now all I need to do is to run the following command. So docker compose. Here also note that when I installed my VPS, I also configured Docker. So Docker is already installed there and it's up and running. So here you need to be careful about this. As I mentioned, if you need also to see or to if you need me to show you the step of configuring the VPS, please let me know and I will create a dedicated video for that. So now all I need to do is to run docker compose. Here I will add -f just to specify or to be more precise. And here it will be docker compose.yaml, which is the file that we just copied. And first I need to do pull -q just to pull the latest versions, or if anything has changed, I want to pull the images. And then after pulling, all I need to do is to run docker compose up -d in a detached way in order to be able to exit the container or the VPS once everything is done. All right, so now we are done with implementing the CI/CD pipeline for our application. So here, let me resume it. So what we did, we created several steps. So the first one is compiling, unit testing, building, build image, and deploy. So the compile, first, always I need to remind you that it runs on a separate server. So like each job will be executed on a different machine. All right. So here we have it will be running on a self-hosted one, which is my own VPS, as I showed you before. So the first step is like to check out the code and then set up the JDK, compile the project. All right. Now we move on to the next one, which is unit tests. Also, it runs on self-hosted unit tests. We have checkout code, set up JDK, and then run the unit tests. Then we need to build a project, and building the project depends or needs the previous 2 jobs, which is compile and unit tests. Now the steps: check out the code, set up the JDK, and then building the project using the command clean package. Finally, or well, last but not least, we need to build the image. Building the image needs, or like depends on this build job. So to build the image, we need to check out the code, set up JDK, extract the project version from our project or from the Maven, and then log into DockerHub. And after that, we need to build and push to DockerHub. But also here, let me add one step before extracting the project. So here I will go back to the build step, and I will just use this one to make sure that even if we run on separate machines, we always have this. All right, so now set up JDK, build project, and then extract the project, or extract the project version, log into DockerHub, build and push to DockerHub, and that's it. Then we move to the last one, which is deploying the backend. So deploying the backend, we need to create the deployment folder using an SSH command, and to SSH I need my VPS username and my VPS IP. So here I have a typo, so it's a VPS IP also in here, and yeah, here is correct. All right, so now I need to create a folder, and I need to copy the Docker Compose file using the SCP or secure copy. And I want to copy my Docker Compose.yaml file. I don't need to navigate anywhere, since here I'm already on the root folder. And then all I need to do is just to specify where I want to copy the file, exactly the file. So I want to copy to the CI/CD. We need to set the environment variables, since these are required by our application or our backend. And then we need to navigate to the CI/CD, and all we need to do finally is just to run the Docker Compose pull to pull any updates. And also we need to run the Docker Compose app -d in order to run our containers. So this is done for the backend. Now we can move on and implement the different steps for our front end. So the front end will be much easier, since we have less jobs to execute, and also we can use the code that we have in here in order to make the implementation a little bit faster. So let's move on and implement the CI/CD pipeline for our front end. All right, so now we move to the step of building the front-end pipeline. So the front-end pipeline will be mainly composed of two jobs. The first one is building the Docker image and then deploying the front end. So building the Docker image, again, we need to check out, extract the version, log into DockerHub, and build and push to DockerHub. And then, of course, we need to read secrets and to push to DockerHub. Once the image is built, we can perform the deployment, which is almost the same as the backend. So we need to create the deployment folder, because here we need to assume that we need to push whether the front end or the backend separately. So we need to ensure that everything is up and ready. So we need to create deployment folder, copy the Docker Compose file with the new changes, and set the environment variables and deploy. So this is a super easy step, and now you get everything and you already understand how to implement the pipeline. So all we need to do is to go ahead and implement it. So in the same way, first let's create a new file, and let's call it pipeline frontend.yaml. Of course, don't forget the extension. And now let's start implementing our front-end pipeline. So here again, we can copy a few things from here. So in the beginning, I will copy all this, since it's almost the same. So here it's BSN front-end pipeline. And now on push to this branch, and the path is book network UI. If we perform any change to the book network UI, and also instead of backend, I want it to be front end, and of course Docker Compose YAML or any workflow that belongs to the front end. All right, so now we can start implementing our jobs. So here we have jobs, and the first one is build image, as we mentioned before. So let's give it a name, and let's call it build frontend Docker image, and also runs on self-hosted runner, my self-hosted runner or my runner that I configured before. And now we need to specify or to provide the steps. So here the name is checkout code, and then uses again actions / checkout v4. So this is the version 4, and we can specify also the depth or the fetch depth, which is 0. After that, what we need to do is to extract the project version. So now name and then extract project version. I will give it an ID as always, and I will call it extract version as we did before. Now we need to run the following command. So I will use a pipe since I need to navigate inside my book network network-ui. And now the command that I want to do is echo in the same way. So here I will assign it to a variable. I will call it version as we did before, equals, and then $, and then parentheses. So here in my server, I already installed JQ. So for your case, all you need to do is to run this command is apt-get install JQ. So JQ is a tool that help you run commands or extract or like do anything within a JSON format or a JSON file. All right. So here I need to run JQ-R, and I want to extract anything called version. So here what I mean is in our book network UI, we have this package.json and we have this version attribute. All right, so this is what we want to extract. So for example, later on it will be 1.0.0.5.0.0.6 and so on and so forth. So this is the one that I want to read. All right, so let's go back here. I want to read the version from which file? From the package.json file. And then I want to output it in my $GitHub _output. All right, so now we implemented the extraction of our project version. Then we need to log into GitHub. So I can copy from here. All right, so we need to log into GitHub, and also I can copy the whole step. All right, so the first one is login to GitHub. Let me bring it back. All right, login to GitHub, and then we use the same action, which is Docker login action v3, and with the username and password, which are stored in my secrets. That's why I mentioned before that that the implementation of the front end is super easy since we already wrote the code for it. And then we need also to build and push to Docker Hub. We will use the same action with now instead of book network, it should be book network UI. And here instead of backend, it should be front end. All right, and then Docker file, we want also to push it. And again, we need the platform, which is Linux AMD 64. And now we don't have build arguments for our front end. And the tag, instead of BSN API, I will use BSN UI with the version. All right, and also I will use BSN UI latest as a tag. Now I will also copy again the deployment job from here. So I can copy all this and let's adjust what needs to be adjusted. So we have deploy, and here let's call it deploy frontend instead of deploying backend. So frontend runs on self-hosted and also depends on this build image job. And the steps first, as we mentioned before, is to create the deployment folder, and we need to SSH into our VPS and create the folder CI/CD. And then we need to copy the Docker Compose using the same command, SCP, and then Docker Compose to our destination. And then we need to set the environment variables and deploy. So for the front end, I don't remember we need any environment variables, but so let's leave it empty, or let's remove these steps. And then we need to navigate into the CI/CD folder, Docker Compose YAML pool, and then Docker Compose up-d. So now the implementation of this job, or like the pipeline for the front end, is done, but we are not yet done. We need to do some changes. So the first thing here, so this is super important. All right, so here in our book network UI, we have our source, and here we have inside the apps, we have the services. All right. So in the services, if we check this API module, it's the API configuration. So the API configuration, since we are generating everything from this API.json, and inside the API.json, we specified the server URL, which is localhost 8088/API/v1, which is correct when we run the application locally. But when it comes to running the application on a different machine, we need to provide or to specify the correct value for it. So now what we want to do is to override this root URL depending on the server or on the environment that we want to deploy to. So we can keep this one as it is, but we need to do something. So in the app module right here, I need to override this configuration right here. All right. So here we have in the imports, we import the modules, but now what I can do, I can import my API module, which is that module. It will be by default imported, but now I want to import it with different parameters. So I will use API module.forRoot, and here all I need to do is to specify the URL or the root URL. So I need the brackets, and here root URL, and now for now I will just hard code it, but we will enhance this a little bit later on, and we will introduce also the environments for the front end too. So it will be http:// and then the IP address of my VPS, which is this one. So I can copy it from here because I know that the backend and front end are running on the same server. So it's 192.168.0.27, and we know that our backend is running on the port 8088, and then we have the context path, which is /API/v1. So don't add the slash at the end. All you need to do is this. All right, so now we configured our app module, and now we are able to change the URL. And then later on, as I mentioned, I will show you how to extract this to an environment variable and make it dynamic from one environment to another. So this is not the end yet for the front end. We need to change something else. Well, it's not a change, but it's an improvement or an enhancement, if we may say so. So we need to go back to our nginx conf, since now our application will be served on a VPS, so it's not served locally. So here nginx needs to know all the information or all the required information about the backend endpoint, okay, how we can reach the backend. So as I mentioned before, when I explained nginx, I mentioned that nginx also serves as a reverse proxy. So reverse proxy, this means that it can forward all the requests from a client to the backend. So now I will add something. Let's call this configuration backend reverse proxy. And this backend reverse proxy, so here we want to trigger on the location /API. So every time the front end try to hit or try to reach something called /API, what I want to do, I want to forward or to bypass a proxy or to create a proxy in order to reach the correct backend. So here I will use a proxy underscore pass property. And this one, I want to redirect all the requests that are /API to my container or to my backend container. So the backend container, if you remember in here, in our Docker Compose, we called it BSN API. So this is important, and we need to keep the name as it is. If you change it, you need also to adjust the proxy.conf. Okay, so here I want to put it or to forward it to BSN API and then 8088, since I know that my backend is running on the port 8088, as you can see in here. Now let's set some headers. So I will use proxy underscore set header, and the header I want to set the host, which is the $host. So to keep the same host, as well as we want to keep the xreal IP and also the forwarded for and forwarded proto. This as few headers that we need to specify in order to make our application or to make the backend understands these headers. So I think we need 3 more headers. So this one is xreal. So you can refer later on to the code in order you don't need to retype everything on your own. So then I need remote address. So for this one, it should be the remote address. And then for the next header, I need the X forwarded. And this one I need to get, so when each time you see dollar something, this is something provided by Nginx, by the way. You don't need to worry too much about this configuration, just apply it and everything should be working fine. So here we have proxy add X forwarded 4. So this is also the variable, as I mentioned, provided by Nginx. And the last one is something called X forwarded proto. And for this one, we will use the scheme. All right, so this is the configuration or the Nginx configuration for the reverse proxy in order to make the application running. So now what we will do next is to push this code to a separate branch, the branch that we mentioned that we will call it this one. So we will call it CI/pipeline, and this will trigger the build. And then I will show you how this is going to be and how we will deploy the application and how we are able, or like how we can access the application remotely. So like we don't need to run it on localhost, but we need to access it using the IP address of our remote server, which is, again, for my case, this one. Okay, for your case, or if you have, for example, if you already have a domain name assigned to this IP address, just use the domain name. Otherwise, you can access the application directly using this IP address or your VPS IP address. So now let's move on and let's deploy things and let's see things up and running. So here, as you can see, I already pushed the code, and now we see that we have two workflows. One is for the front end and the other one is for the back end. So now, since I have only one runner, I need to wait for each of them to be running. So now we have our BSN front-end pipeline already running. And here we see that now we are running the build front-end Docker image, which is already done. And now it's deploying the front-end. All right. So once this is done, we can move on and see if the backend is triggered or not. So now, yes, it's triggered. And now we have compiled project and unit tests. And for the backend, we are already building the backend. So if we check, we will see that now we finished the setup JDK step. Now it's compiling the project, and then like it's post setup JDK and post checkout and so forth. Then it moves automatically to build Docker image. So now, as I mentioned, since I have only one runner, so like it's switching between backend and frontend. So now it's running the deploy frontend step. And as we can see, copy Docker compose file, which is already done, and then set the environment variable and deploy. This one also should be quick, and then we can move back to the old or to the previous one. So here, as you can see, we have this build frontend Docker image, which depends, which the deploy frontend depends on it. So now we have a green pipeline. So the frontend passed. Now we can go ahead and check the frontend. The backend again. So for the backend, if we check the workflow, we have these two jobs are running in a parallel way, and then the build backend depends on these two jobs. Once this job is done, we can move to the next one, since also this one depends on the build backend and the deploy depends on this one. So if I highlight this, we see that this, like we already show the previous one, or like which depends on what, or something like that. All right, so now we can just wait for the build. And then we will see how we can access, or we will try to access the application directly using our VPS. So like it will not running locally. I will also stop everything that's running locally on my Docker. So here, as you can see, I will stop all of them. So I can stop all the containers. So we are 100% sure that we are not mixing between our local machine and the remote one. So we know that we are not mixing because the remote one is accessible via the IP address, and locally we can access the application using just the local host. So now it's deploying the backend. Once the backend is deployed, we can go ahead and check the application. But before that, we can also SSH into our server and see what has been deployed there. So let's do it meanwhile, and then we will check the application, and I will show you how we can use the application also from the VPS. All right, so even like the pipeline was a bit faster, so the deployment is also done. So first, let me let's access the application. All right, so here, as you know, this is my remote address, and it's 192.168.0.2027, and it's on the port 8080. So I will use I will go to the login. Here we see that we have the login page. All right. So now the login page, let me check if I have any tokens. Let me clean everything. And now, since we don't have any user yet, all I need to do is to go and check or do a register. All right. So I will use Ali, Bo Ali, and I will use my Gmail account and then a password. So yeah, if you need to reach me out, please use this email address as well. So now let's click on create an account. And now I should receive an email. So let me check my my email, and here we go. So this is the code that I just received right now, and I will use it in order to activate my account. So it's 961 and then 932. So activation successful. Now if I try to log in with my email and password.com and then password, sign in, maybe a typo. All right, so now I'm already connected to my application. So now I can go ahead and try creating a book. So let me just try to create a book. So I will select any image, some title here, just to demo, and then let's call it Alibu and ISBN and some synopsis, and also share me. Now if I click on save, we have the book saved. I can check the details, I can update the book, I can share it, and I can do many things as the same features that we implemented all together. So now we implemented the full pipeline, everything is up and running, and the application is accessible directly in or under my on my VPS. Great. If you're watching this means that you reached the end of this video. And I hope that you also watched the previous one, which is building the Book Social Network application from scratch, starting from business requirement, designing the class diagram, designing the application, implementing the different features from backend to the front end with all the dependencies and all the different parts, which is good. Now you are able to containerize the application, and also you know how to build a full CI/CD pipeline that will check, compile, build, run the tests, and Dockerize the application, push the image to the Docker Hub or to a registry of your choice, and also deploy the application to a VPS. Now, are you ready for the next part, which is for me the most important, because it talks about security. And we know when we implement an application, security is really important. So in the next video, I will show you how to implement or how to secure your application using Keycloak for both backend as well as frontend. And I mentioned before that JWT is not really the best option when it comes to security. So let's go ahead and let me teach you how to secure an application using an auth provider like Keycloak. I will show you all the necessary configurations, how to enable social login, like for example, how to enable social login for DockerHub, for also Facebook, Instagram, and so on and so forth, all the social applications that are supported by Keycloak. But this will not be the end of our journey. In the coming videos, I will teach you so many interesting stuff. So for example, let me name few of them, and of course, like we will come up with so many things that we will learn together from this Book Social Network application. So first I will show you how to do or how to implement a rate limiting. If you don't know rate limiting, I will explain it in the coming videos. Also, we will build a real-time notification system using WebSocket. So for example, if a user wants or like is waiting for a book to become available, he needs to get notified whether like in a real-time notification or via email and so on and so forth. But the best part is yet to come. If you are watching this, I really would like to know who are the people that are following my videos to the end. Just in the comments, drop comment with +1. So I just want to know or to count how many people are watching my videos to the end. So now let me announce the best part. So the best part is we will migrate this application
fully to microservices. So I will show you how to start from the application that we implemented together and how to use or how to apply DDD pattern, which is the domain driven pattern, and how to use the different patterns that we need in order to build our application, or to upgrade or to migrate, you can call it whatever you want, to migrate our application to a microservices based architecture. And for that, we will be using 100% Spring Cloud. So like we will not use anything else. It will be 100% Spring Cloud. So like we will deepen our knowledge and our learning journey into the Spring framework. If you find this interesting, as I mentioned before, just comment with +1. I want to know who is watching this right now. So like I wanted to leave this announcement to the end of the video, just to know who are my real followers on YouTube. You see that I'm already smiling while announcing this, because this is going to be really important and really interesting for you guys. So I hope you enjoyed these videos. Please stay tuned for the coming ones, and don't forget, if you are new to my channel, just go ahead and subscribe, and of course share this video with your friends and drop comments and leave me a thumbs up. So let's help this video, and let's make this video go worldwide and reach more and more people. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.